enslaved Africans on the plantations, they were always looking for opportunities, always looking for ways to get out every chance they got. And sometimes, and this was hard too, sometimes they hmm, sometimes they had to leave their families, and when they left them, sometimes they had help. They had help. Um, Even if sometimes they knew that they couldn't go, other other slaves would help them. Yeah, and that had to be hurt. Had to hurt. Had to hurt. And I'm gonna tell you something in a few minutes to show you something about how deep this was. But as you look at this map, this is from 1849 to 1850, and you see where it's all this territory that was open. And so I want you to imagine that you're enslaved African trapped on in some of the slave states. You're trying to get away to anywhere, and now they just made a law that said that no matter where you went, people had to help capture you and return you. So if the people helped you, they were risking their own lives and their families' lives and their freedoms themselves. But they did it anyway, because thousands of enslaved Africans escaped, because that's why they had to keep making fugitive slave acts. Remember, the one that came out in 1850 was what, 13 years before the Civil War. So it was deep. And in some cases, like I say, it was crazy. The Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 penalized officials who did not arrest an alleged runaway slave, made them liable for a fine of $1,000. That's about $30,000 in present day money. Law enforcement officials everywhere were required to arrest people suspected of being a runaway slave on as little as a claimant's sworn testimony of ownership. In other words, a white man show up, raise his hand and say, I swear that that's my slave. And law enforcement was required to arrest them. The suspected slave could not ask for a jury trial or testify on his or her own behalf, because slaves didn't have that right. Black people didn't have the right. And in addition, any person aiding a runaway slave by providing food or shelter was subject to 6 months imprisonment and $1,000 fine. That's for white people. Uh, Officers who captured a fugitive slave were entitled to a bonus or promotion for their work. Doesn't that sound like the police today? Yeah, it kind of do, don't it? So you had a conflict going on, and that's why I wanted you to understand this. There was a conflict going on between those who were, um, I'm talking about white people who were against slavery, and those who took part in all of the auxiliary stuff. They might not have owned slaves, but they was out there capturing them, transporting them, doing all kind of stuff, selling them, and just like their descendants today say, well, my family didn't ever own no slaves. But did they participate in the industry? Yeah, a lot of them did, didn't they? Okay. Um, there was, I'll come back to that in a second. I want you to watch this. One of the people who was definitely one of the leaders, one of my heroes. Um, they call them abolitionists today. I just say there was black people who was helping black people. This one, William Still, Still. Check it out.
These chilling words of a runaway slave were told in Philadelphia in the 1800s. William Still was a black abolitionist, businessman, and a major agent for the Underground Railroad.
Inner city Philadelphia at 12th and Locust Streets, William Still was helping a newly freed slave by the name of Peter find his family. As it turned out, Peter was William's brother. Some 40 years earlier, their mother escaped from her plantation and had to leave Peter and another child behind. Peter and William, who is remembered with this marker, never set eyes on each other until that day in 1850.
Keep looking. Keep looking.
Clarence is a direct descendant of legendary abolitionist William Still. Through Philadelphia's Underground Railroad, William Still helped to free hundreds of escaping slaves and captured their stories and movements in a book. For African Americans like Leslie looking for traces of their ancestry, that kind of record keeping was rare.
The 1870 census listed all the slaves by name, and prior to that it becomes more difficult. And of course, in the Deep South, many of those records were destroyed by fires during the Civil War, or records were just absolutely destroyed in general.
There were only scarce clues from the plantation sale and inventory records that listed enslaved people among the property, like this: one plow, one bolt of cotton, one Negro woman, Millie, 45 years old.
Okay. I want to talk for a second about Shadrach Menkins. Shadrach Menkins was a fugitive slave from Virginia who escaped in 1850 and got all the way to Boston. He's known, in terms of our history, for being freed in a courtroom in Boston because some U.S. Marshals captured him under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And members of the Boston Vigilance Committee freed and hid him. They took him out the courtroom away from them U.S. Marshals. And they hid him, helped him get to Canada, and he settled in Montreal, where he raised a family. Now, 2 men were prosecuted in Boston for doing that, but they were acquitted by a jury. And I love that story because they went in the courtroom and took that brother out of there. Okay? There was also and the order was a group of black folks in Detroit who were conscious conductors on the railroad. In other words, they were organized. They worked with very, very, very few whites to help escaping slaves. That was a secret order in Detroit, 2 brothers. They were amazing. Oh, and I got to tell you about one situation that happened. Let me go back to this because I don't want to miss this story. It was called the escape on the Pearl. The Pearl. One of the most well-documented escape attempts from Washington, D.C. was on April 15, 1848. 77 enslaved Africans fled their captivity in Washington City, Georgetown, and Alexandria. 77 of them. And it was a 54-ton schooner called the Pearl that was waiting to take them. And it was docked on a secluded spot. And the plan was to sail the Pearl southward on the Potomac River to the Chesapeake Bay, then up the bay to the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal, and on to Philadelphia. This was the largest single escape attempt in U.S. history. 77 of them. Think about it. If you saw 77 black people in Washington's port, and he reported about the schooner's movement. Second, as soon as the schooner reached the mouth of the Potomac River, a severe storm prevented them getting access to the Chesapeake Bay. And then, after having traveled more than 100 miles, the Pearl was forced to seek refuge from the storm and dropped anchor in a small cove called Cornfield Harbor. Well, now back in Washington, D.C., the slave owners they were so mad that they of Georgetown donated the use of their steamboat called the Salem. Within hours, the Pearl was spotted where it had anchored and was overtaken by the angry posse. They towed them back to Washington, where there was a lynch mob waiting, and they didn't kill them. They just beat them bad and returned them to their respective owners. Now, I don't know. I've tried to find out more information about this. I don't know if some of them tried to escape again, but it's interesting because that same area was one of the places where a lot of slaves would try to they would get away from. They start at the beginning at the Kennedy farmhouse and ending at Harper's Ferry. You recognize that name, Harper's Ferry? Yeah, let me bring this up for you so you can see why I'm mentioning this. John Brown. Now, John Brown is one of the few people that I actually give credit to as a white man who was serious about getting rid of slavery. It started with his parents, with his father. And so he was always about the abolition of slavery. Let me read you this. Hudson and the Underground Railroad. Hudson had a long tradition of being an anti-slavery town. By 1826, records show that the town's founder, David Hudson, was hiding runaway slaves at his home. Early settler Owen Brown and his family helped organize the Underground Railroad in town. His son John, who spent over 20 years of his life in Hudson, grabbed national attention with his raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry on October 16, 1859, and his execution on December 2nd, 1859. At first, Hudson's citizens supported the colonization movement, but in the 1830s, many became abolitionists. The colonization movement was the idea of sending them back to Africa. The anti-slavery community became divided, a struggle which cast both Hudson and Western Reserve College into the national spotlight. Let me see. Make sure I go to the second part, to the back. Owen Brown removed his financial support from the college and helped to form multiracial Oberlin College as an alternative. And Oberlin College is still today known as a very, quote, liberal college. And they have a curriculum which especially the right wing, they hate that. So let me see, where's the rest? Okay. In 1842, Owen Brown split from the First Congregational Church of Hudson over racial issues and formed the Free Congregational Church, which supported pure abolitionism. An oath against slavery was required for admission. The anti-slavery community in Hudson included David Hudson, Timothy Hudson, Owen Brown, John Brown, Jeremiah Root Brown, Ashel Kilborn, Jesse Dickinson, Titus and Marion Brown Hand, John Buss, John Markilly, Laura Case, Eleazar Wright Jr., Philo Wright, Berea Green, and William Dawes. A complete list of Underground Railroad sites in Hudson is available at the Hudson Library and Historical Society. So they were serious in that town. So I like to, like I say, give credit where it's due. All right. Now, one of the prevailing, I call it a myth. Well, let me put it this way: there have been stories over the years that the slaves, the enslaved, excuse me. Now, there have also been some people who came up later and said it wasn't true. Okay. Now, I don't know why they would want to say it wasn't true, unless they're just trying to take away from the fact that oh, I don't know. Well, I guess it's trying to take away from the idea that Africans were more responsible for their freedom than white people. See, because that's one of the things that's going on even now with some of these folks, latter day white people who want to try and claim that the Underground Railroad was dependent upon white people. That wasn't true. Um, White people could participate, but black people's escape from slavery was not. All right. Now, um, one of the things that evidence has shown is that yes, they did use the quilts for signals and passing messages and different things, just like they also did it in their hair. Um, they braided their hair with messages. Now that's something the white people definitely can't get to, you know. But I want you to check this out about the quilts.
Quilts were often seen hung on a windowsill or across a fence. Slaveholders and overseers were not suspicious, but the story is that these quilts contained hidden messages. For example, the monkey wrench pattern meant gather tools for escape. Another was the North Star, a signal that meant prepare to escape and follow the North Star to freedom in Canada. Drunkard's Path was a signal to take a zigzag route. Fleeing slaves seen traveling south were not as likely to cause suspicion because escapees typically traveled north. A bear's paw pattern was meant to signal slaves to follow a mountain trail. A bow tie was a symbol to fugitives to dress in disguise. A shoe fly identified a person who could guide and help. The log cabin pattern indicated that it was necessary to seek shelter. The courageous slaves that took a chance and fought for freedom improved our country.
So, again, I want you to understand that there was so much going on. And yes, they used quilts, they used the braided hair, because again, if we understand that the entire country, it was dangerous for black people, period. Okay? Now, it was dangerous for the whites who helped, but it was a totally different kind of thing. It's just like today. There are white people who can try and aid in fighting racism, but it is totally different for black people. It's serious. It's serious. We lose our lives from being shot by the police, and all kinds of things, right? So we need to understand some of our heroes, like Frederick Douglass here, and of course Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman, she was amazing. She was amazing. She was she was an escaped slave, but she decided she would go back into the slave states and bring out enslaved Africans who wanted to be free. She went at least 19 times. And there's other records that say she went even more than that, and that she helped hundreds of enslaved Africans get out. That's amazing. In fact, at one point, I think it was 1848, by 1848, there was a $40,000 bounty on her head. $40,000 in 1848, that's like $1 billion, right? And also, there's a story about her having a gun and that she threatened slaves. What she did was this: she understood how dangerous it was. And so once you agreed to go, it wasn't no turning back, because of several things. One was, if you were allowed to turn back and go back and you got captured, or even if you didn't get captured but you went back and the slave master and them knew that you had gone on this route, they could make you tell how they went and help identify some of the people who might have been helping. So her thing was, no, if you agree to go, it's all the way. And before I let you go back, I will just drop you right here. And also, and this is the part that they don't like to talk about, but it's real, and that's this: if it was discovered that you were a traitor, that you were a plant, and they had people that would pretend to be running away so they could find out all they could about who was helping. If she discovered that you was doing that you was undercover, she'd drop you right there, and righteously so. You know, yes, sir. I know that some people say, "Oh, that's terrible." No, it wasn't. She was risking her life and helping to free enslaved Africans who could lose their lives if they were caught. They do all kinds of things. What did I tell you earlier? Sometimes they cut off their foot. They do all kinds of things. One of the things they would do with a buck, if he got caught running away, they would do. Here's one of them, and it's one of the most terrible things. They captured him and brought him back. The slave owner would strip him naked, tie him over a log with his, behind up, and then rape that man in front of the other slaves, including his woman, his children. Do that right in front of them. The worst kind of humiliation you could ask, right, to do to a man, and then let him live. It's like Abu Ghraib. That was a prison over in Iraq. And if you remember, some photographs got out where they had taken some prisoners, Iraqi prisoners, stripped them naked, and forced them to be laying on top of each other and stuff, right? And then took pictures of it. For these Muslims, that was one of the most humiliating things you could do to them, to strip them naked, force them to lay on top of each other. And then they had women soldiers who were there making them do that. Now, these were American soldiers doing that to them. Where did they get it from? They got it passed down from slavery. Let me stop. Let me not get started. Okay. Because that's the kind of thing that just gets me angry. Oh, by the way, that graphic right there, this is William Still here. And I mentioned already about there's Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, and there's another graphic there that's in the sequence. There's Harriet Tubman, and and that's why I don't. There was that talk about putting Harriet Tubman on a bill. That's Shadrach Menkins, the brother that they broke out of the jail, out of the courtroom in Boston. Oh, but I was talking about Harriet Tubman. There was some talk about putting her on an American currency. And, some folks thought that was real cool. I didn't. I don't think that's cool at all. The reason why is this. They call them dead presidents, right? It's not up to them to honor our heroes. Okay? It's up to us to honor our heroes. So if whatever we decide should be how we deal with it. Putting her on a dollar bill or a $10 bill, whatever it is, that's not an honor. It's not an honor. Okay? It's the same woman who defied the laws. Because remember, there was laws, y'all. It was a law, the Fugitive Slave Act, that was passed for black people, because we were the only ones who were slaves at the time. And it said that all citizens had to help capture and turn in escaped or runaway slaves. So they can't tell me nothing, because these were federal laws, government laws. Okay? All right. I think that's about everything I wanted to cover, but I hope you got a better idea. You see, did I miss anything major? In terms of certain things, I talked about the Fugitive Slave Acts, laws, and wow. Yeah, let's see. Yep, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. My objective was to get you to a point where you had a better understanding of what the so-called Underground Railroad was, so that we could better understand that when we are organized, we cannot be beat. We cannot be beat. When we're organized, we are unbelievable. And when this idea that there was ever a time during slavery when black people just accepted it, that was not true. We fought it tooth and nail every single day in every single way. If we wasn't rebelling, we was escaping. If we wasn't escaping, we were messing up the stuff on the plantation. We were a constant, quote, nuisance. And that's why they had all the laws and all of, look, remember, there was a time during slavery where in some slave states, all the men had to participate in slave patrols. And that meant at nights they went out, night and day, they had to go out riding around like the neighborhood watch. There were slave patrols. All the men had to participate. And you had to go out and stop every black person you see to make sure that they were not runaway slaves. Okay? So that's why even down to the day, there's this attitude among white men especially about wanting to be in your business, because they used to being on slave patrol. Anyway, I'm going to close out. And I hope that this is recording okay because I want you to be able to, if it stopped on you while we were doing live, you can go back and watch it. And I hope that I did a decent job of giving you a better picture, a true story of what I call the above ground highway, which they have called the Underground Railroad, so that we have a better picture of how we have never just sat by and been slaves, all peaceful and stuff. And as always, I say, uh, no justice, no peace, no love.